there is this little plot that's happening where I believe people like Matt Walsh and others are trying to get you to take your focus off of Israel and what Israel is doing, because they're still killing people in Gaza, by the way. And they're trying to make it so that you fear Muslim Americans. Now, we're going to get into this story here that happened with Mehdi Hassan, but it's not just about Mehdi Hassan. I have seen it nonstop the past week, all on Twitter. They have been coming after Mehdi. They've been coming after Zohran. They've been coming after basically Muslim public figures, attacking them and pointing their fingers, even going as far as to saying, oh, you're going to do the next 9/11. It is so much blatant Islamophobia right now coming from these accounts like Matt Walsh and the like of, and they're getting a lot of retweets. And I am here to tell you, do not fall for this propaganda, because I really believe they are trying to get the American people to fear Muslim people so that you are no longer focusing on what Israel is doing. They are really trying to make the case that these are the people that you should fear the most when Israel has committed a whole damn genocide. Now you can see it starts here. Let's go ahead and bring this up here. Thank you. Here's Matt Walsh. Islamophobia is the fakest, dumbest concept I've ever heard of. Somehow even more BS than transphobia, which I didn't think was possible. These people flock here by the millions while simultaneously claiming that our country is mean and terrible to them. Okay, if it's so bad, then leave. Now, first, let's push back on something here. Basically, what Matt Walsh is saying is, if you come here, you have no right to complain. There have been a number of racist and Islamophobic comments towards Zohran, towards Mehdi as well, because he personally went after Mehdi head to head, as you will see. So you're just supposed to pretend like those things are not happening. You're just supposed to put your head down and do a good job, right? So this panel here, it's a CNN. I think this is the one. Oh, no, this is the Zohran thing. Zohran came forward and he is talking about the Islamophobia surrounding him. And I've seen them all. I've seen them on social media. It also came from Andrew Cuomo. Even Eric Adams got in on it. They're all on it. Listen to this.
I want to use this moment to speak to the Muslims of New York City. I want to speak to the memory of my aunt, who stopped taking the subway after September 11th because she did not feel safe in her hijab. I want to use this moment to speak to the Muslims of New York City.
Those things did happen, right? Those things did happen. Because you know what? Some of us remember 9/11. I remember 9/11, and I remember afterwards, yes, there was rampant Islamophobia in this country. Yes, there were people they were getting attacked and they were getting beat up because they were wearing a hijab. Yes, those things did happen. And now all of a sudden, because he's getting close and it looks like he's going to win, because he's getting close, early voting has already started. Now they're ramping up the Islamophobia once again. Now I want to show you something. Shout out to Unity Africa. If you don't want them, maybe you shouldn't be occupying their lands and committing acts of terrorism there, as well as arming and funding that evil terrorist state that bombs their countries daily. This is the U.S. military presence in the Middle East. This is disgusting. Turkey, Syria, Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, Kuwait, UAE. You see this? Jordan, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia. This is what's happening in those countries. Okay? Our military is that involved in those countries. Our military has overthrown leaders in those countries. But Matt Walsh isn't going to tell you that. Matt Walsh isn't going to say, hey, U.S. military, stay out of those countries. He's not going to tell you that. Matt Walsh and others are trying to bring back up identity. The same people who say don't talk about identity politics, always talking about identity politics. They're trying to bring up identity, and they're trying to purposefully attack Muslim Americans right now because Zohran is on a path to win. And they don't want that to happen. Then on top of that, you have Mehdi Hassan. I'll get into the attacks that he did towards Mehdi Hassan as well. But all of this is to take your attention off of Israel, to get Americans to stop pointing their finger at Israel and blaming Israel and despising Israel, to get you to go back to the days of 9/11 and start pointing your finger at Muslim Americans again. That's what this is about. They're always trying to redirect your attention. You'll see it here in the case of Mehdi. Matt Walsh goes, the answer is me. I'm more American. You aren't American at all. And nobody here likes you or wants you here. So here we go again. Right? So Mehdi's response here was, he was responding to Mehdi's tweet. Who is more American, the guy who supports free and fair elections, me, or the guy who got mad when judges locked up violent insurrectionists, Matt Walsh? The guy who supports the First Amendment, me, or the guy who wants to imprison people for their speech, Matt Walsh? So you see this guy, this Matt Walsh, he's a distraction. And let me tell you why. Because you know what you notice? You know what I noticed about him? You don't never see him go after power. He goes after people and goes after things that he knows could be a big distraction, but ultimately don't impact your lives in the way that you think they do because they're not in positions of power. He is there to keep the status quo. So as long as he can get you to hate Muslim Americans, as long as he got you out there saying, what is a woman, and got you focused on that, you're not focusing on who's at the top. It's a distraction. So let's see what Mehdi said here. Because he came after Mehdi, started attacking him, and I'm trying to tell you right now, on social media, on Twitter, they have changed the algorithm again. And a lot of these accounts that are attacking Muslim Americans, they are being amplified by the algorithm. So listen to what Mehdi said, and then I'm going to show you what they're trying to do to Zohran as well right now. We live in a crazy world.
We need to talk about Matt Walsh. And if you're asking Matt who, then I'm truly envious of you. Normally, I wouldn't waste time responding to basically an internet troll, but Matt is so emblematic of everything that is wrong with the modern MAGA right. Faux outrage, self-victimization, verbal abuse, a walking, talking Dunning-Kruger. Now, Matt Walsh, who says he's a conservative Christian, is upset with me for being a Muslim and for being an immigrant, but above all else, for being an American. That he cannot stand. So he did an entire 13-minute video calling me a spiteful, lying, self-entitled brat, on top of his tweet in which he called me an ungrateful little bitch, just as Jesus would have said. Now, before we get into the substance of Matt's claims, if we can even call it that, before we get into what I said about Muslims and the founding of America, a little bit of background on who Matt Walsh is. Shock jock podcaster, former radio DJ, and now basically that Daily Wire guy who isn't Ben Shapiro. He's also the guy who hasn't got the greatest of political judgment. He went all in on Ron DeSantis in the GOP primary and then had to come crawling back to Trump when DeSantis got destroyed, as some of us predicted he would. Matt is also the guy who said COVID wasn't a big deal, that, quote, it's totally irrational to panic over this virus. He later admitted he got it wrong. But here's my favorite. Matt was so bothered by a black woman playing Ariel in the Little Mermaid movie that he actually said this.
From a scientific perspective, it doesn't make a lot of sense to have someone with darker skin who lives deep in the ocean.
There are no...
These are the things that he gets you to focus on. He gets you to focus on these things that don't matter in your freaking life. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who a damn mermaid is. These are the things. Matt Walsh has been doing this for years, and a lot of people fall for it. Meanwhile, you can't put groceries on the table. You don't know if you can pay your light bill. You got laid off and you still looking for a job. He talks about things that don't directly impact your lives. It's a distraction.
Words to describe how dumb you have to be to try and make scientific arguments about the skin color of mermaids, which are fictional fucking characters, Matt. This is the guy who millions on the right turn to for intellectual guidance, historical analysis, and thought leadership. Then you wonder why this country is so screwed right now. By the way, just quickly, consistency isn't really his thing either. In May of this year, he said identifying as a girl dad is super cringe and corny. In 2020, though, he said being a girl dad is a great blessing. He constantly complains about political violence and death threats when they're aimed at him, but he's happy to dish it out to the people he doesn't like. He's called for the mayor of Chicago, a black man, to be executed. He's called for Jimmy Kimmel, a comedian, to be arrested. He once said this, too.
But it is in fact true that you have to make people hurt. And I'm sorry, but holding signs and yelling loudly will not make anyone hurt.
You have to make people hurt. Now, what's really bothering him about me is that I said in a recent visit to Dearborn, I think that if you can play church bells, you can pray the call to prayer. Isn't it okay for Muslim Americans to broadcast a call to prayer? I mean, let me add right now, within reason, of course, and in accordance with all local sound and noise ordinances. But Matt went nuts and said Christianity built this country. Islam did not at all in even the slightest way. That's why we can have our church bells. To which I responded, 1 in 3 of the slaves who built this country were Muslims. They were here long before the Walsh family arrived. You'd know that if you'd studied history, but I know MAGA has an issue with studying.
This is actually true. I looked this up myself just to double check. But yeah, 1 in 3 slaves who built the country were Muslims. That is true. So again, Matt Walsh just says things and just people just believe it because, like I said, Elon Musk, he has changed the algorithm to amplify the right-wing accounts.
To which Matt responded with a 13-minute video in which he got really mad, but was unable to rebut the 2 central points that I made. Number 1, enslaved people helped build this country. And number 2, perhaps up to 1 in 3 of those slaves were Muslims. Matt can't rebut that because it's true, according to historians, according to the African American History Museum, according to the US State Department. Muslim slaves are a historical fact. As his boss Ben Shapiro has famously declaimed, facts don't care about your feelings, Matt. It's not my fault if they didn't teach you about slavery in high school. In his video, Matt Walsh sounds like a Monty Python sketch. What did the slaves ever do for us? Ignoring the railways, the roads, the ports, the literal seat of our government, the White House, and the Capitol, all built by enslaved people. And 1 in 3 of them, remember, being Muslims, black African Muslims. Matt is also just completely clueless about the Muslims who fought in the Revolutionary War, in the War of 1812, in the Civil War, where most of them fought in the Union Army. But then again, Matt's been pictured wearing a Confederate t-shirt, so maybe he's mad that the Muslims fought against the Confederacy. He even issues this challenge to me.
If Islam had ceased to exist 300 years ago, this country would not have lost a single thing. There is not a single good thing about our country that we would not have if not for Islam.
Again, he just says things.
And if you doubt that, then go ahead and give me an example of the great gift that Islam has given to this country since its founding.
Has he never heard of the Golden Age of Islam, which helped fuel the Renaissance and the Enlightenment in Europe, which of course then helped produce the American founding fathers? Has he ever gotten off of the internet and read a book? Well, look, I'm happy to fill the gaps in his education. He asked me to explain what Islam or Muslims have done for America. I mean, The black Muslim slaves aside, more recently, how about the planning of the moon landings? That was a Muslim American scientist and immigrant. How about the science behind modern skyscrapers? That was a Muslim American engineer and immigrant. How about brain tumor treatment? That was a Muslim American neurosurgeon and immigrant. Just this year, the Nobel Prize for Chemistry went to, among others, a Palestinian American Muslim immigrant whose research Matt could never possibly understand and whose work could help tackle man-made climate change, which Matt doesn't believe in. Because Matt Walsh's knowledge of science is right up there with his knowledge of history.
And we can go on and go on and go on all day. But the reality here is this, right? That's one thing, this battle between him back and forth with him and Mehdi Hassan. And look, Mehdi Hassan and I don't agree on everything either. I didn't like the way that Mehdi Hassan spoke to Jill Stein. We had disagreements back then online. I didn't agree with him on that. That being said, I am noticing this trend over the past week of these accounts like Matt Walsh coming after Muslim Americans saying, oh gosh, we need to get them all out of here. Trying to get you to be fearful of them so you can take your focus off of Israel. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised, considering now that Charlie Kirk is no longer alive, I wouldn't be surprised if this isn't some type of plan with Turning Point USA. We got to get the American people to fear Muslims again, and that'll take their attention off of Israel. I wouldn't be surprised. And also, if Zohran Mamdani wasn't in this race, probably wouldn't even be hearing about this at this point in time. Look at what he says here. Matt Walsh, Muslim Americans have been treated far better here and have been far more welcome than any white American Christian would be in a Muslim country. Once again, that is incorrect, right? There wasn't any sort of campaign or persecution and oppression against Muslims after September 11. That is false. In fact, the government went absurdly out of its way to avoid even the impression of such a thing. To this day, they make sure to screen elderly white disabled grannies at TSA just as much as they screen military-age Arab males named Muhammad, even though 0% of the global terror threat comes from the former and 100% comes from the latter. That is false. The terror threat comes from Israel. I think we all have seen that. We know what's really happening here. But Matt has to push this propaganda because if he can convince you that it's the Muslim people that you need to be afraid of, well, then you may not be paying as much attention to Israel and what Israel is doing anymore. Goes over here and says, this country is bent over backwards for the Zohran Mamdanis of the world. And for all that effort, we don't even get even so much as a thank you in return. Thank you for what? So he's mad because Zohran finally said something, put this here, finally spoke out here about the treatment that he's been getting. We'll come to that in just a second. Even now, as you see, House Republicans are now pushing to denaturalize Zohran Mamdani and possibly deport him because of issues with his censorship form, per New York Post. Eric Daughtry, who is another one of those right-wing accounts that is amplified on X, said, do it back to Uganda. So this is what I've been talking about, folks. I've seen it all week. They're trying to, now they want to, let's denaturalize Zohran Mamdani so he won't be mayor. This is how far they're willing to go. And here's the thing. I'm not even like a Zohran fan or stan. I think Andrew Cuomo is horrible. If there were third party, I would probably urge people, oh, vote for the left third party candidate, but there isn't one. I think Andrew Cuomo is absolutely horrible. And part of the reason why there isn't a third party candidate is because of Andrew Cuomo, because he changed the rules to make it more difficult for them to get on the ballot. But nobody should be okay with this. Nobody should be okay with what they are doing and how they're trying to fearmonger. We go on here, and I gave the warning to people here. The CNN panel comes in. They're smearing Zohran to turn your attention away from Israel and to get you to fear Muslims again. Scott Jennings and the right-wing accounts on X are elevated to spread that message. Don't fall for it. Listen to what Scott Jennings says.
I want to speak to the memory of my aunt, who stopped taking the subway after September 11th because she did not feel safe in her hijab.
Today he has his press conference. I watched a chunk of it. I didn't hear any words for the victims of 9/11, but he found the real victim, his aunt. The victims of 9/11 were in the Twin Towers. Those were the victims.
Is the implication here?
So does Scott Jennings not realize that some of the victims of 9/11 were also Muslim? You see where the thinking goes? You see the propaganda that's being spilled here on CNN? Let's continue.
That he has to answer for the terrorists who attacked 9/11?
No, I think if you're going to have if you're going to run for mayor of New York City, or have any position in New York City, and you're going to talk about 9/11 or invoke 9/11, you darn sure better start with the people who died in the Twin Towers. That's what I think. And he didn't do that. And he kind of, he made it about his experience and his aunt and all this. My advice would be, if you're going to want to be the mayor of this town, and by the way, he's probably going to win. That moment in our history, you cannot lose sight of what happened. People died in those Twin Towers. They did not deserve to die. We did suffer a terrorist attack. And we can't really forget the moment, making it about him and his family. Okay, there were almost 3,000 people that died there. It's a big deal. It is true.
But let me say something here. You know what else we can't forget about? We can't forget about the videos of the dancing Israelis after that 9/11 attack either. But Scott don't want to mention that because he's an Israel stooge. He's not going to mention that. We can't forget about that video. And the way that he says this is almost as though there were no Muslim Americans that were also killed during those attacks. Also, if we really want to go there, notice how the US has no problem having this allyship with Saudi Arabia. Who flew the planes? So see, Scott, people like Scott, you're not serious. Scott Jennings ain't serious. He's basically on CNN to offer, I guess, like this right-wing perspective to try to get CNN's ratings back up because they fell in the toilet prior to the presidential election and even more after the presidential election. That's basically why he's there. He's a big propagandist. He said some very, very Islamophobic things on that show. And the fact that he's still allowed to be able to come back on there, think about this for a second. If it were the other way around and he would have said something negative about Israel, he would have been called anti-Semitic. He would have never been allowed back on CNN again. But he can get on CNN and he can say all these Islamophobic things and he still comes back on as a regular. And by the way, these people are friends. Abby Phillips and Scott Jennings are friends. They're not just people that sit at the table and just argue back and forth. There are pictures and videos of them hanging out when they are not at the studio. I don't have friends like that. So this is where we're at now, folks. Getting back to the Islamophobia, he knew exactly what he was doing with this remark. Scott knew exactly what he was doing.
Mamdani, he's allied himself with certain people. A lot of the people that surround him, the people involved in this democratic socialist organization, I mean, they have said more than a handful of eyebrow-raising things when it comes to their views of America, their views of Jewish people, and so on and so forth. He knows that. He does align himself with them. He doesn't really distance himself.
So do you see this? Once again, the victim has to be, it has to be a Jewish American. That has to be the victim that you give the most attention to. But you can sit right there and say whatever you want to say about Muslim Americans and you get a pass. And for him to sit right there next to a black woman making these comments, the fact that he is still allowed to come back on that show, but you won't allow the pro-Palestine people to come on the show. And that's your friend. Zohran finally did give a response to what was happening. We're going to play a little bit of this here.
And over these last few days, these are the lessons that have become the closing message of Andrew Cuomo, Curtis Sliwa, and Eric Adams. Yesterday, Andrew Cuomo laughed and agreed when a radio show host said that I would cheer another 9/11. Yesterday, Eric Adams said that we can't let our city become Europe. He compared me to violent extremists, and he lied when he said that our movement seeks to burn churches and destroy communities. The day before that, Curtis Sliwa slandered me from a debate stage when he claimed that I supported global jihad. And every day, Super PAC ads imply that I'm a terrorist or mock the way I eat, push polls that ask New Yorkers questions like whether they support invented proposals to make halal mandatory, or political cartoons that represent my candidacy as an airplane hurtling towards the World Trade Center. But I do not want to use this moment to speak to them any further. I want to use this moment to speak to the Muslims of the city. I want to speak to the memory of my aunt, who stopped taking the subway after September 11th because she did not feel safe in her job. I want to speak to the Muslim city worker, whether they teach in our schools or walk the beat for the NYPD, New Yorkers who all make daily sacrifices on behalf of this city only to see their leaders spit in their face. I want to speak to every child who grows up in New York marked as the other, who is randomly selected in a way that rarely feels random, who feels that they carry a stain that can never quite be cleaned. Growing up in the shadow of 9/11, I have known what it means to live with an undercurrent of suspicion. I will always remember the disdain I faced, the way my name could immediately become Muhammad, and how I could return to my city only to be asked in a double-mirrored room at the airport if I had any plan of attacking it. And since I was very young, I have known that I was spared the worst of it. I was never pressured to be an informant like a classmate of mine. I've never had the word terrorist spray painted on my garage as one of my staff had to endure. My mosque has never been set on fire. To be Muslim in New York is to expect indignity. But indignity does not make us distinct. There are many New Yorkers who face it. It is the tolerance of that indignity that does.
What I want to add here, and then we'll get to the other part as well, is this. Those things, I remember after 9/11, I can tell you guys, those things really did happen. I remember it very clearly. I know one person in particular who changed their name so that people, okay, maybe they won't attack me if they don't hear my name. And you have people like Matt Walsh, Scott Jennings, and other conservative pundits, and Democrats too, because Andrew Cuomo did it too. And so did Eric Adams, trying to take you back there. Anything to protect and maintain the status quo. And I'm here to tell you guys, don't fall for it. Because we have seen multiple episodes in a row of Israel's genocide and people calling out Israel and the world turning against Israel. But now we are going to the next episode. Now we're going to the episode where they are really trying to bring in a new story. And this story changes it and it makes the villain Muslim Americans. That's what they are trying to do. And if they can continue, the media, all of them, Fox News, CNN, all of them, if they can convince you that you should be afraid of Muslim Americans again, then we would have lost the plot. And all the work that we have done over these years, protesting, speaking out against Israel, the flotillas, all of it would have been lost. So We cannot allow those episodes to become archives, to end up on a shelf, a dusty shelf in a basement that no one can get into unless they have a key. We can't allow ourselves to be tricked and fall into this. I don't care if you agree with Zohran's policies or not. It's one thing to say you disagree with the policies. It's another thing to go after the identity. This is the game that they're playing. Pay very close attention to it. They are really trying to take you back there, folks. They're really trying to take you back there. This person sums it up so well. Listen to this audio here.
Zionists push Islamophobia because it's easier than getting people to like Israel. Have you ever noticed how whenever you see someone promoting hatred toward Muslims, 9 times out of 10 it'll be someone who supports Israel? There's a reason for that. Zionists promote Islamophobia because convincing Westerners to hate Muslims is easier than convincing them to love Israel. Support for Israel is a hard sell. On paper, it's just a shitty, evil country full of shitty, evil people and has no redeeming qualities as a state. Nobody can explain how it's an important ally in a way that makes sense. All the problems they claim it helps solve are problems Israel itself creates with the help of Western backing. Unless you're a devout Jewish Zionist or Christian Zionist, there's nothing about the modern state of Israel you'd naturally be inclined to support.
That's right. So what they are doing is that they can increase support for Israel by just convincing everybody to turn away and run away from Muslims again. But we're not going to fall for it over here. We'll talk about the next episode.